Did the capture of Mr. Libby comply with international law?
We know that Mr. al-Libby planned and helped to execute plots that killed hundreds of people, a whole lot of Americans. And we have strong evidence of that. And he will be brought to justice.
Consider that a dodge. After last weekend's capture of the al-Qaeda leader charged with orchestrating the 1998 embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania, the Obama administration finds its counterterrorism policy once again subject to scrutiny. In what some call a return to Bush-era tactics, al-Libby is being questioned aboard a Navy ship in the Mediterranean Sea, without access to a lawyer and without having been read his Miranda rights. But while the ACLU and many on the left are decrying the lack of due process, President Obama is also receiving criticism from those on the right, who say al-Libby should be sent directly to the prison at Guantanamo Bay.
They're treating him as an enemy combatant under the law of war. That is a good decision. The bad decision is not to put him in a permanent confinement facility that will allow long-term interrogation. This system of using Navy vessels, Navy warships in lieu of Gitmo, compromises our ability to gather intelligence.
A Navy vessel is not a substitute for a detention facility like at Guantanamo Bay, which is a top-rate detention facility.
Al-Libby to the top-rate detention facility at Guantanamo Bay remains unlikely, as President Obama has ruled out adding inmates to the Cuban prison. What remains unclear is al-Libby's ultimate fate. With most Republicans opposed to civilian trials in the U.S., will the administration bring al-Libby to American soil to face criminal charges? Joining us now is the director of the ACLU's National Security Project, Hina Shamsi. Hina, thank you, as always, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
It is always a thorny issue, that of national security, but just playing that tape, you can see while some people are saying, look, this man should be read his Miranda rights, keeping him afloat on a sea vessel is no way to actually that is not justice, and that is not the American way of law, nor and that is in violation of the Geneva Conventions. You have Republicans saying send him to Gitmo. But I want to talk about, from the ACLU's perspective, you say al-Libby has the right to counsel. Tell us more about why you have that position.
Well, first of all, let me just say that those saying that Mr. al-Libby should be sent to Guantanamo are trying to fight a battle that they've already lost. There's no way that that's going to happen, and that's exactly the right thing. The issue here is, and some are talking about the Obama administration setting up a new model for terrorism suspects. If that's the case, this is the exact wrong model. This is a man who has been charged with very serious crimes in our criminal justice system. He should immediately be transferred to civilian custody, brought before a judge, and yes, given his right to counsel. Now, there is this myth that somehow having counsel prevents information being obtained through interrogation, intelligence information being obtained. That is exactly wrong, and hundreds of terrorism prosecutions in the federal criminal justice system prove that is wrong. Indeed, having counsel often means that we're going to be able to get more and better information that can be used at trial and is not going to jeopardize the fair trial rights that our system affords.
And Alex, I mean, the sort of thesis here seems to be, or the strategy is, we keep him on this ship for as long as we can, get as much intel from him as we can, then potentially he comes to U.S. soil, stands trial, but none of the information gleaned on the ship is admissible in the trial. Therefore, that makes it okay. It's something that we've done in 2011 for Ahmed Abdul Qadir Warsami, and also in 2001, the Bush administration held John Walker Lind from 2001 to 2002 on a ship.
Right. I mean, I think the problem for the administration here is you've got the argument that we can get intelligence even if somebody has a lawyer is absolutely accurate. But there's a strong public and political perception that it's not accurate.
Right.
And the problem becomes you can be a civil libertarian in principle. When you're president, I would imagine that the thing that keeps you up at night is, am I going to be the president who lets Americans get killed by a dirty bomb or some sort of terrorist attack? The right thing to do, the smart thing to do, may be to bring him immediately to the U.S., to give him a lawyer and say, okay, let's talk. But it's certainly not going to be the politically astute thing to do, and it's going to be the thing that a lot of people tell you you're wrong, and if something bad happens, it's your fault. And I would imagine it's hard to live with yourself hearing that.
But that doomsday scenario is simply not the case here, and Imagine this. Imagine if any other country claimed the right to sweep in, capture someone, hold them in military custody, and hold them in this kind of interrogation detention. What would we say? Is this the model that this administration wants to leave behind? I don't think so.
And Michael Steele, we were talking about this in the break, this idea that the rules must be elastic because the field of battle is everywhere. The enemy is unseen. I mean, it makes it very difficult to lay down any sort of principled positions when you say everything is up for grabs.
Well, I think that's why the administration finds itself in the crosshairs here between the reality of a Gitmo, which is an established process procedure under the rules of engagement as defined by the Bush administration, which they have bought into, quite frankly, in many respects, and this sense of, well, we're going to treat these terrorists as if they're American citizens and afford them all these rights, privileges that attain,
Miranda rights, for example.
Miranda rights. Well, yeah, but I mean, if I commit a crime over there, how do the question a lot of Americans ask, well, how do Miranda rights attach to you in Afghanistan? If you're caught on Afghani soil and you're committed terrorist acts in the Middle East, how do we apply those rights that we have if we go down to the 7-Eleven and blow something up to you? And so that's where, to your point, where the administration has not been very clear in explaining how this new reality is going to fit in with the current reality.
The U.S. Constitution.
Well, but again, I mean, a lot of Americans don't attach U.S. constitutional rights to terrorists.
Well,
so if you're going to do that, then you need to explain to the American people why you're doing that. And you can't rely on the ACLU to do that exclusively. There has to be either a policy or some other type of nexus that you bring this all in. You go out on the streets of New York and you ask people, should these rights attach? And the answer overwhelmingly will be no.
Well, but Hina, it's not just relegated to foreign fighters like this one. I mean, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev was not read his Miranda rights for 48 hours using the public safety exception. And I think, again, to Michael Steele's point or to Alex's point, the popular sort of position here, the politically expeditious position, is to say these guys are terrorists, justice will be done, and we'll worry about the details later.
You know, it is very dangerous to create some kind of exception for terrorism, which is, yes, a grave crime, but it is a crime that our criminal justice system is used to handling. And in response to your question, your point, responsible policy making requires explaining to the American public that giving people fair trial rights that our system has had for hundreds of years does not mean making us weaker. It actually means making us stronger.
On that note, does it surprise you that there is still a conversation about Gitmo? I mean, given where we would think some parts of public opinion should be, which is that Gitmo has been a pox on our democracy, has not been good in terms of our broader foreign policy goals. There you have Lindsey Graham and Kelly Ayotte saying, let's not worry about closing Gitmo, let's add to the prison rolls.
It doesn't surprise me, although the people who are advocating adding people to Guantanamo are marginalized. That's not what the real debate is right now. The real debate is how to make the closure of Guantanamo happen. And we've seen renewed, revitalized efforts from the administration. We don't think that they're quick enough. We don't think that enough is being done right now, but they're moving in the right direction. I don't think anyone who is a serious, responsible policymaker would want to see us perpetuate the human rights and national security nightmare that is Guantanamo.
You know, Ezra, it's worth noting that the cost of each Gitmo inmate per year is $900,000, whereas in a supermax prison, it would cost the U.S. government $60,000 to $70,000. This is just sort of, I guess, an example that when it comes to national security, counterterrorism, the military and defense operations, there is a different standard with Republican budget hawks.
Money suddenly is no object. It's a fascinating thing. Although one thing that has always just been puzzling about the Gitmo situation, and it's also true in this situation, is that part of the perception that Michael's talking about is this kind of inchoate belief that terrorists are somehow so dangerous that if we put them in a supermax prison, something unspecified but awful would happen. I mean, this was the argument about running Gitmo, right? They weren't saying open Gitmo, take people to New York City, let them loose. There was argument nobody wanted a supermax prison holding terrorists suspects in America, that they didn't want it in their district, they didn't want it in their state, as if they can shoot lasers from their eyes or fly through the roof.
Well, but I mean, I think if you make that argument,
you cannot recruit very effectively in a supermax prison.
But I think
really.
That may be a rational, an eminently rational point of view. But if you go out there and say these guys aren't that dangerous to the average American, I think that the average American is going to be like, you're crazy.
Just like but that's exactly what I think is like that is what we've done. We've blown terrorists who are often jokers on some level, right? They're dangerous in their element, but they're not more dangerous than normal criminals. They're not incredibly strong or perceptive or intelligent or strategic people, into somehow these supervillains who we need to be afraid of on a different level, even when they are locked up.
Good luck with convincing Americans.
But I'm trying to make an argument that's correct. I'm not trying to convince Americans of people something here. I'm trying to say
just like there are no drugs in supermax prisons, right?
But Ezra does bring up a point, which is that, and you could look at the Boston Marathon bombings, when the entire city of Boston was shut down to find a 17-year-old or a 19-year-old. I can't remember how old Dzhokhar Tsarnaev was. But there were folks who said, what are we doing in the name of national security and terrorism? Is this cost worth the benefit? Now, I think that everybody wanted to see him caught, captured, and brought to justice. But at the same time, there is a question about how much we're spending, the sort of the surveillance state that we've established, some people would say the shredding of certain parts of the U.S. Constitution in the name of keeping us safe. But the conversation around that is a very, very quiet one and tends to be in a smaller part of the room than it should be, I think, Hina.
It is, because right now what we have are conversations based on fear instead of actually based on fact, on rationale, on what actually happens. And as a result of that, we have burgeoning financial costs, surveillance costs to our privacy, when the reality is, as one federal judge said to a terrorism suspect who was being convicted, you think you're bigger than you are. You're not. You are a criminal, and we are going to be able to deal with you in our criminal justice system and prevent you from achieving the aims that you might have. That's exactly the right strength-based approach. We don't need a fear-based approach.
Well, that works until the next terrorist attack, and that's the reality that most Americans have. And you're right, it is a fear-based approach, but they sit and they see that we've been safe so far by some of these measures that are draconian.
Right, it's hard to prove a negative.
It's that balance. It's the balance.
The ACLU's Hina Shamsi, thank you as always.
Thank you.